My daughter rolled her eyes when I walked into the courtroom, but then the judge froze and whispered, "Is that her?" The whole courtroom went silent. They had no idea who I really was until... Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My name is Annabeth Harding. I entered the courtroom not as a titan but as a ghost. The air inside the United States District Court was exactly as I remembered it. Cold, still and smelling faintly of old paper, floor wax and the low-grade anxiety of 100,000 human dramas. It was a place I had once commanded, a domain where my voice had shaped fortunes and ended careers. Today I was here as the respondent, the subject, a frail old woman in a simple but elegant Chanel suit. My presence meant to be a problem to be managed, a life to be adjudicated. My performance had begun the moment I'd left my car. My shoulders were slightly stooped, my walk a fraction slower than necessary, my hand holding my purse with the faint, telltale tremor of age. I was playing a part they had written for me. I saw them sitting at the plaintiff's table, my daughter Chloe and her husband Gavin. Chloe was dressed in a beige suit the color of surrender, her hair pulled back in a severe, joyless style. She was performing the role of the long-suffering daughter, a woman forced by tragic necessity to take this terrible step. She saw me walk in, her lawyer pointing me out, and she rolled her eyes. It was not a grand gesture but a small sharp viper strike of contempt, a dismissal of my entire existence in a single fluid motion. It did not hurt me. The capacity for her to inflict that kind of pain had been cauterized the moment I heard that voice message. Her gesture simply confirmed the data I had already gathered. My daughter, the girl I had raised, was a hostile actor in this drama, and she would be treated as such. I took my seat beside my lawyer, the gentle Mr. Peterson, my movements slow and deliberate. I looked towards the bench, and my breath caught the judge. A formidable-looking woman with intelligent eyes and hair the color of steel, was staring at me. Her professional, impassive mask had slipped. Her eyes, wide with a dawning, incredulous shock, were locked on my face. I knew her instantly. Evelyn Reed. She had been a terrified, brilliant junior associate on the opposing counsel in the Westwood equity fraud case 25 years ago. I had dismantled her senior partner on the stand in under an hour. It seemed she had done very well for herself since. Judge Reed leaned over to her clerk, a young man who looked barely old enough to vote. She whispered something, her hand shielding her mouth, but in the profound silence of the courtroom, I could just make out the words faint and laced with awe. "Is that her?" The clerk looked at me, then back at the judge, his expression one of utter confusion. But the whisper was a stone dropped into a still pond. A ripple of inquiry spread from the bench. The bailiff, who had been slouched against the wall, straightened up, his gaze now fixed on me with a new sharp interest. The lawyers at their tables, sensing a shift in the room's barometric pressure, turned to look. The entire courtroom went silent, the air charged with a question that only the woman on the bench and I knew the answer to. Chloe and Gavin were oblivious, still wrapped in their own drama, whispering to their lawyer. They had no idea that their carefully planned lawsuit, their entire strategy, had just been rendered obsolete. They had walked into a courtroom, expecting to depose a frail old woman. They did not realize they had just come face to face with a ghost from the legal world's most brutal legends. Evelyn," I thought, a grim humorless smile touching my lips for the first time in months. "You always were a sharp one." This just became a great deal simpler. Judge Evelyn Reed was a professional to her core. The flicker of shock on her face was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cool, impassive mask of judicial authority. But I could see it in the rigid set of her shoulders and the way she held her gavel, her knuckles white. I knew, and she knew that I knew, that the entire landscape of the proceeding had been irrevocably altered. She was no longer presiding over a standard, sad conservatorship hearing. She was now the reluctant referee in a game she knew only one of us was equipped to play. Her next actions were a masterclass in subtle procedural power. She tapped her gavel once, the sound a sharp authoritative crack in the tense silence. "Before we hear opening statements," she announced, her voice calm and betraying none of her earlier shock, "this court will take a 1-hour recess. Counsel for both the petitioner and the respondent will join me in my chambers." Immediately, she looked pointedly at Chloe and Gavin's lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Davies. "Clients will remain in the courtroom." A murmur of confusion went through the gallery. An immediate recess, a summons to chambers with counsel only. It was a highly unorthodox move, a clear signal that something was deeply irregular. Davies looked momentarily flustered, his rehearsed opening statement now useless. He exchanged a bewildered look with Chloe and Gavin before gathering his papers and following Judge Reed's clerk out of the courtroom. My own lawyer, the kind but hopelessly outmatched Mr. Peterson, gave me a questioning look. I simply nodded, a silent command for him to comply. He scurried off, leaving me, Chloe and Gavin in the suddenly vast and empty-feeling courtroom. The confidence that had radiated from my daughter and son-in-law just moments before had begun to curdle into a nervous, angry uncertainty. Their carefully planned drama had gone off script. "What is this?" Chloe hissed at Gavin, her voice a low, furious whisper. "What's she doing? Is this normal?" "Of course not," Gavin muttered back, his own smooth facade beginning to show cracks. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture. "She's probably just a stickler for procedure. Davies will handle it. It's a power play, that's all." I watched them from across the aisle, my expression neutral. Gavin, for all his predatory instincts, was a creature of the business world. He did not understand the intricate, unspoken language of the federal judiciary. He saw a power play, but he misunderstood its direction. This wasn't Judge Reed asserting her power over the lawyers. This was her paying a reluctant, terrified deference to a power she knew to be far greater than her own. She wasn't controlling the room, she was trying to prevent the room from exploding. When Mr. Peterson returned 20 minutes later, he looked shaken. He sat down beside me, his hands trembling slightly. "That was unusual," he whispered. "Tell me everything, Robert," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Judge Reed barely looked at me. She spent the entire time addressing Mr. Davies. She asked him about the grounds for the petition. She asked him if he had personally interviewed the witnesses to your supposed decline. And then she told him something very strange. He consulted his notes. She said, "Counselor, I strongly advise you to use this recess to conduct a more thorough background check on the respondent. Specifically, I would direct your attention to the federal judiciary of the Southern District of New York, circa 1985 to 2005. She told him she wanted him to be fully aware of the legal precedent regarding malicious prosecution in her courtroom. It was exactly as I'd predicted. A warning shot. A professional courtesy. Evelyn was giving him a chance to save himself. "What does it mean?" Mr. Peterson asked, his face a mask of confusion. "It means, Robert," I said, patting his hand, "that the judge is a very thorough woman." Mr. Davies returned to his table, his face pale. He immediately began whispering furiously to Gavin and Chloe. They thought this was a legal battle. They failed to understand that it had just become a history lesson, and I was the one who had written the book. I decided it was time to provide a little clarity of my own. I rose from my table and walked across the aisle, my movements slow and measured. The frail, slightly stooped posture I had adopted for weeks was gone. I stood tall, my back straight, my shoulders squared. I stopped before their table. Chloe looked up at me, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. Gavin refused to meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on his phone as if his life depended on it. Their lawyer, Mr. Davies, looked at me and I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He had clearly found what Judge Reed had sent him to find. I did not speak to him. I spoke to my daughter. My voice was not the warm, gentle tone of her mother. It was the voice I had used to cross-examine mob bosses and dismantle corporate raiders. It was a voice as calm, as clear and as cold as a coroner's scalpel. "Chloe, Gavin," I said, the names feeling foreign in my mouth. "You have made a grave tactical error. The judge has just graciously offered your counsel an exit ramp, a chance to walk away from this before the consequences become irreversible. I suggest you advise him to take it. Withdraw this petition, now." It was not a plea. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, a final transactional offer. For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in Chloe's eyes. She was unnerved by my transformation, by the sudden, inexplicable shift of power in the room. She looked to Gavin for guidance, but he was a statue, his face a mask of dawning horror. But my daughter's arrogance, her deep-seated belief in her own superiority and my irrelevance, was a powerful narcotic. The doubt passed, replaced by a familiar, contemptuous sneer. "Is that supposed to scare us, Mother?" she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "A little courtroom theatrics? You're trying to bluff. It's pathetic. We'll see you in court." I looked down at her, at the child I had raised, and I felt a profound and weary sorrow. I had given her one last chance to walk away from the abyss. And she had just jumped right in. "Very well," I said, my voice quiet. So we shall. I turned and walked back to my table. The battle was no longer about persuasion or warnings. They had made their choice, and now, I would make mine. I would no longer be the respondent in their petty, grasping lawsuit. I would be the instrument of their destruction. The hammer was about to fall. When court resumed, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that was almost palpable. Mr. Davies, Chloe and Gavin's lawyer, looked like a man who had aged 10 years during the recess. He rose to his feet, his movements stiff and uncertain. I could see the internal war raging on his face, the duty to his clients warring with the primal instinct for professional self-preservation. He had clearly advised them to withdraw, and they had just as clearly refused, blinded by their own hubris. My own lawyer, Mr. Peterson, stood up first. I had briefed him during the final moments of the recess. He was a good, decent man, and he was terrified, but he was also a man of integrity. Your Honor, he began, his voice hesitant. At my client's request, I must regretfully petition the court to be removed as counsel in this matter. Judge Reed looked at him, her expression unreadable, though I detected a glimmer of respect in her eyes. On what grounds, Mr. Peterson? My client feels she would be better served by representing herself. Your Honor. A shocked murmur rippled through the gallery. For a layperson to represent themselves in federal court was rare. For an elderly respondent in a competency hearing to do so was unheard of. It was a move of either supreme foolishness or supreme confidence. The reporters in the back were already scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Judge Reed looked directly at me. Mrs. Harding, she said, her formal tone a masterpiece of judicial neutrality. Are you certain you wish to proceed pro se? I rose to my feet. Every eye in the courtroom was on me. I felt the old familiar weight of a room's focused attention, and it felt like shrugging on a well-worn coat. I am, Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and ringing with an authority that had been dormant for years. I feel I am uniquely qualified to represent my own interests in this particular matter. Very well, Judge Reed said, a flicker of something amusement respect in her eyes. Mr. Peterson, you are dismissed. Mrs. Harding, you may proceed. I gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, and sat back down. Across the aisle, Chloe was staring at me, her mouth slightly agape, a look of genuine baffled confusion on her face. Gavin was ashen. This was not part of their plan. They had expected to fight a hired lawyer to bog him down in paperwork and procedure. They had not expected to be fighting me. They still saw me as their mother. They had yet to understand they were now facing the hammer. That evening, I returned to my quiet, stately home, a place that had been my peaceful sanctuary in retirement, and transformed it back into a war room. I walked to my study, a room at the back of the house that had remained locked for the past 5 years. The key turned with a stiff, reluctant groan. The air inside was cool and still, smelling of old leather and aging paper. It was a time capsule of my former life. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves groaning under the weight of thousands of volumes of case law. My desk, a massive block of mahogany that had once belonged to my father, was exactly as I had left it. My old gavel lying next to a faded photograph of Robert and me on the day I was first appointed to the bench. This room had been my sanctuary, but also my arsenal. It was from here that I had orchestrated the dismantling of the Genovese crime family's financial empire. It was here that I had drafted the briefs that led to the conviction of the CEO of a fraudulent Wall Street investment firm. Now I was reopening it for one final case, Harding Verite. I sat down in my old leather chair, the familiar creak a welcome sound. For a moment the weight of the past, of all the battles fought and won in this room, settled over me. And then I began to work. I unlocked a fireproof safe in the corner, a relic of a time when threats against my life had been a credible concern. Inside it did not contain jewels or cash but something far more valuable, my old contacts, a collection of private, unlisted numbers for the network of brilliant, loyal and often dangerous people I had worked with over the years. My first call was to a man named Marcus Thorne, not the lawyer but a different Marcus, a grizzled, cynical ex-police detective who now ran a high-end private investigation firm. He owed me his career, after I had refused to let him become the scapegoat in a politically motivated corruption scandal 30 years ago. Annabeth, he grunted when he answered, his voice a gravelly rumble. I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you again. Don't tell me you're finally ready to write those memoirs. Something more pressing, Marcus, I said. I need a full workup on a man named Gavin Scott, my son-in-law. I want to know everything. His business dealings, his personal life, every skeleton in every closet he's ever had. I need it yesterday. Consider it done, he said without hesitation. It's good to hear your voice again, Judge. The world's gotten too quiet without you. My second call was to a woman named Priya Sharma. She had been my most brilliant law clerk, a prodigy with a mind for forensic accounting that was nothing short of genius. She now ran a global firm that specialized in untangling complex financial crimes. Judge Harding, she said, her voice warm with genuine affection, to what do I owe the honor? Priya, I need a favor, I said, and I proceeded to explain the situation. I needed her to be ready to analyze a set of financial documents, to follow a trail of money that I was certain would lead to a very dark place. It would be my pleasure to assist the court, she said, the professional formality a thin veil for her eagerness. Priya, I knew, loved the hunt even more than I did. My final call was to my son, David, a quiet, thoughtful professor of history who lived in Boston. I told him what was happening. His reaction was one of quiet, simmering fury. He offered to fly out immediately. Not yet. I told him, your battle will come, but it won't be in the courtroom. For now, I need you to be my historian. I need you to start digging into Chloe's life over the past 5 years. Talk to her old friends, her former colleagues. I need to understand what has brought her to this point. I need to know who my daughter has become. By the time I hung up the phone, the sun had set. The war room was active. The pieces were in motion. I was no longer just a mother defending herself. I was a prosecutor building a case, and the targets were my own daughter and her husband. My first official act as my own counsel was not a defensive motion, but a surgical strike. I spent the next 2 days drafting a subpoena. It was not the broad, sweeping request for documents that a less experienced lawyer might file. It was a document of devastating precision, a legal scalpel designed to cut directly to the heart of Chloe and Gavin's fraudulent enterprise. I did not ask for all the financial records of their so-called tech startup, Innovest. I asked for the minutes of the board meeting on October 17th of the previous year, the investor prospectus from the second round of funding, the complete unredacted record of communication with their initial investors, and the specific wire transfer records to an offshore holding company in the Bahamas that I had a strong, educated hunch would be there. I was not fishing, I was demonstrating that I already knew where the bodies were buried. The subpoena was served, and I knew it would send a shockwave of panic through their camp. Mr. Davies would recognize the legal artistry of the document and would likely advise them again, more forcefully this time, to retreat. But I knew my daughter, I knew her pride, and I knew Gavin's desperation. They would not back down. A few days later, just as I had anticipated, they launched their counterattack. It was clumsy, brutish, and utterly predictable. They leaked a story to a notorious online gossip blogger, a woman who specialized in character assassination. My son David read the article to me over the phone, his voice tight with disgust. It was a masterpiece of manufactured sympathy. It painted a picture of Chloe as a brilliant modern businesswoman, being stifled by her old-fashioned, controlling mother. It was filled with quotes from anonymous friends, who worried about my increasingly erratic behavior, and my vindictive paranoia. It claimed my move to represent myself was not a sign of strength, but a clear symptom of a persecution complex. Mom, this is disgusting, David said, his voice shaking with rage. We have to respond. We have to issue a statement. No, David, I said, my voice calm. I was looking at the first set of documents from my subpoena, which had just arrived. We do not never wrestle with a pig. You get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it. What does that mean? He asked. It means they think this is a battle for public sympathy, I explained, my eyes scanning a damning financial report. They've misidentified the battlefield. This is not a PR war. This is a federal court case, and in my courtroom, gossip is not admissible as evidence. Let them play their games in the mud. We will be fighting with facts, and I assure you, the facts are all on our side. I read the article and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. It was the desperate act of amateurs. They were fighting a war of perception, while I was preparing for a war of annihilation. The documents I had subpoenaed began to arrive at my study in large sealed boxes. It was a deluge of paper, a blizzard of financial data that would have been impenetrable to a layperson. But to me and to my former clerk Priya, it was a story waiting to be told. Priya, true to her word, flew in from London. For 3 days my quiet, stately home became a hub of intense, focused activity. We turned my large dining room table into our headquarters, spreading out bank statements, investor reports, and corporate filings. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and fresh coffee as we worked late into the night. Priya, with her brilliant forensic mind, was a marvel to watch. She moved through the complex data with the grace of a master detective, her fingers flying across her keyboard, connecting disparate pieces of information with an intuitive genius that had always astounded me. "They've been cooking the books with 2 sets of records," she explained on the second night, pointing to 2 different spreadsheets on her laptop. The screen cast a cool blue light on her focused face. One for the investors, showing fake profits and exponential growth, and this one, the real one, which they kept hidden, showing a direct pipeline of funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "To Gavin," I said, my voice quiet. It was not a question. "To a holding company solely controlled by Gavin," she confirmed. "He's stolen over $15 million, and the whole thing is about to collapse. Their last major investor is demanding a full independent audit. That's why they're so desperate. The conservatorship wasn't just about getting the rest of your money, Annabeth. It was about gaining control of the family's legal and financial apparatus to hide this fraud before it all blew up. They were going to use your assets to pay off the investors they'd cheated." The sheer scale of their audacity was staggering. They weren't just trying to rob me, they were trying to make me the unwitting accomplice in their massive fraud. While Priya was untangling the financial web, my private investigator Marcus was digging into the personal one. He delivered his report to me in person, a thin file that contained a story of breathtaking personal deceit. He sat in the wingback chair opposite my desk, a grim, cynical look on his grizzled face. "Your son-in-law is a piece of work, Judge," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A real pro. Gavin, it turned out, was not just a con man in business. He was a con man in life." Marcus had uncovered a history that had been carefully scrubbed from the internet. A previous marriage which had ended abruptly after his wealthy wife's family had discovered his financial indiscretions. A failed business in Chicago under his original family name, which he had legally changed. He had a pattern of preying on wealthy single women, a charming predator who saw love and marriage as a means to a financial end. The report also contained a detailed accounting of his personal life. Since marrying my daughter, there were secret credit cards, expensive trips I had known nothing about, and a devastatingly clear pattern of a severe gambling addiction. There were records of large cash withdrawals from casino ATMs in Las Vegas, and a string of catastrophic losses in a high-stakes online poker game. He hadn't just been funding a lavish lifestyle, he had been feeding a demon, and he had used my daughter and my family's money to do it. But the most painful revelation, the one that felt like a physical blow, was reserved for the final page of Marcus's report. It was about my daughter Chloe. For years I had been giving her pieces from my personal jewelry collection, family heirlooms that had been passed down from my grandmother. A string of pearls, a diamond brooch, a set of emerald earrings that had been my mother's. I had given them to her for safekeeping, with the understanding that they were part of her heritage, to be passed down to her own children one day. Marcus had, on a hunch, cross-referenced a recent auction catalog from a major New York auction house, and there they were, Lot 2047, an Art Deco emerald and diamond suite, Lot 312, a natural pearl necklace, all sold to anonymous bidders over the past 3 years. He had even found the receipts from a high-end jeweler in Beverly Hills, who specialized in creating museum-quality replicas. Chloe had been systematically selling off her own history, her grandmother's legacy, and replacing it with fakes. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply personal, it transcended money. It was an act of a soul so hollowed out by greed, that nothing, not even sentiment, not even memory, was sacred. I sat in my study, the evidence of their crimes laid out before me. The financial fraud, the personal cons, the petty heartbreaking theft of family heirlooms. This was no longer just a legal battle to protect my assets. It was a crusade to expose a rot that had been festering at the heart of my family for years. My final move was to turn one of their own against them, the CFO of their sham startup, a brilliant but naive young woman named Sarah Chen, was unknowingly complicit. Her signature was on the fraudulent investor reports. She was facing serious prison time, and I suspected she had no idea. I did not send a lawyer. I did not send a subpoena. I invited her to my home. She arrived looking nervous and defensive, a young professional clearly out of her depth. She likely expected an interrogation, a legal threat. I offered her none of that. I had learned long ago that the most effective way to turn a witness is not through intimidation, but through a clear, logical presentation of their own self-interest. I sat with her in my sunroom, the afternoon light streaming through the large windows. I served her tea in my best china, and then I calmly, methodically, laid out the entire case in front of her. I showed her the 2 sets of books Priya had discovered. I showed her the wire transfers to Gavin's offshore account. I explained the specific federal statutes regarding wire fraud and securities fraud. I did not need to raise my voice. The cold, hard facts were indictment enough. She was terrified, her face ashen with the realization of how badly she had been used. He told me it was standard practice, she whispered, her voice trembling. Creative accounting. There is nothing creative about it, Miss Chen, I said, my voice not unkind. It is simple, old-fashioned theft. And you, as the signatory on these fraudulent reports, are now legally considered a co-conspirator. As it stands, you are facing a potential prison sentence of 10 to 15 years. I let the weight of that statement settle in the quiet room. I saw the panic in her eyes, the frantic calculations of a life about to be destroyed. Only then did I offer her a way out. The district attorney's office has a great deal of discretion, I said. The first person to cooperate in a conspiracy case, the first person to provide testimony and evidence against the primary architects, often receives the most leniency. Sometimes even full immunity. I leaned forward slightly. I cannot make you any promises. That would be unethical. But I can tell you that I am a woman with a certain amount of influence. I still have friends in the U.S. Attorney's Office. If you were to come forward, to tell the truth and provide the state with the original unedited financial records that I am certain you have kept for your own protection, I believe your situation could be greatly improved. I had not just assessed her legal jeopardy, I had assessed her character. She was ambitious, yes, but she was not a true criminal. She was a rule follower who had been charmed and manipulated by a master. Her instinct for self-preservation, I gambled, would be stronger than any misplaced loyalty to Gavin. I let her sit with that for a long moment. I was not threatening her, I was offering her a choice, a chance to save herself from the sinking ship that was Gavin in Chloe's life. By the time she left my home an hour later, her eyes were red, but her shoulders were set with a new resolve. She was no longer their CFO. She was my star witness. The final piece of my legal and moral puzzle was in place. The day the conservatorship hearing resumed, the courtroom was a different place. The gallery, which had been sparsely populated during our first session, was now packed to the rafters. Lawyers from downtown firms, reporters from legal journals, even a few law students had come to witness the spectacle. The whispers had spread through the legal community like wildfire. Judge Annabeth the Hammer Harding was back after years of silent retirement. She was representing herself and she was about to put on a master class. I walked to the plaintiff's table, no longer as the frail respondent but as the de facto prosecutor. I placed my single thick leather briefcase on the table and sat down, my expression calm and unreadable. Across the aisle, Chloe and Gavin sat with their lawyer, Mr. Davies. They tried to project an air of confidence, but I could see the nervous tension in their shoulders, the way Gavin kept adjusting his tie as if it were a noose. They had no idea what was about to hit them. They had prepared for a battle of opinions over my mental state. They had no idea I had changed the terms of engagement to a trial about their criminal conspiracy. The court calls this hearing back to order, Judge Reed announced, her voice a sharp, commanding crack. She looked at me. Mrs. Harding, since you are now representing yourself, you may proceed. You may call your first witness. I call Gavin Scott to the stand, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and authority that silenced the low murmur in the room. Gavin looked momentarily panicked, but with a reassuring nod from his lawyer, he made his way to the witness box. He was sworn in and sat down, his carefully constructed facade of charming success firmly in place. I did not approach him with aggression. I began gently, my questions simple, almost conversational. I asked him about his educational background, his business history. I had him describe in his own glowing words the brilliant, innovative concept behind his tech startup, Innovest. He warmed to the subject, his arrogance making him garrulous. He spoke of synergy and disruption and next-generation platforms. He was weaving a beautiful, intricate web of corporate jargon for the court. Then, after lulling him into a state of comfortable self-importance, I began to pull on the threads. Mr. Scott, I said, my tone still mild as I gestured for the clerk to project an image onto the large screen in the courtroom. You mentioned your second round of funding, which raised over $10 million. A key part of that was the prospectus you sent to investors, wasn't it? Yes, of course, he said confidently. It detailed our projected growth and our robust profit margins. Indeed, it did, I said. The prospectus appeared on the screen. It projects a 30% growth in revenue for the fourth quarter of last year. But the actual bank records which we have here show not a growth but a net loss of $2 million. Can you explain that discrepancy to the court? He began to stammer, his confident tone faltering. That's a matter of accounting methodology. We use a different system for our internal bookkeeping than for our investor reports. A different system, I interrupted, my voice hardening slightly. Are you referring to the two different sets of books your CFO, Ms. Sarah Chen, will be testifying about later today? The one for the investors and the real one that documents the $15 million you funneled into an offshore holding company? A wave of shock went through the courtroom. Davies jumped to his feet. Objection. Counsel is testifying. She's making baseless accusations. Is it baseless, Mr. Davies? I asked, turning to him. Or would you simply prefer I present the wire transfer records now? Sustained, Judge Reed said, but her eyes were fixed on Gavin with a look of cold fury. Answer the question, Mr. Scott. I continued, relentless, for the next hour. It was not a shouting match. It was a cold, quiet, and brutal deconstruction of a man's life. I used his own fraudulent documents, the damning reports from my investigator, the records of his gambling debts. I did not need to raise my voice. I simply presented fact after fact, leading him through the labyrinth of his own lies. I had him explain the wire transfers to his offshore account, which he claimed were payments to a consultant. A consultant named G. Scott Enterprises? I asked, my voice laced with ice. A company with a mailing address that corresponds to a beach bar in Grand Cayman. A bar you appear to have visited 6 times in the last year, according to your own credit card statements. He began to sweat profusely, his expensive suit wilting under the pressure. The charming facade was gone, replaced by the raw, desperate panic of a cornered con man. He was contradicting himself, getting lost in his own deceptions, his credibility disintegrating with every answer. The final blow came when I presented him with the evidence of his previous failed business in Chicago, under his real name Gavin Pedorowski. Is it your standard business practice, Mr. Scott, or should I say, Mr. Pedorowski, to dissolve a company, legally change your name, and move to a new state after your investors have lost their life savings? He stared at me, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He was utterly, completely destroyed. He had been so focused on proving me incompetent that he had never prepared to defend himself. Before I could even call Sarah Chen to the stand to deliver the final fatal testimony, it was over. Gavin, a broken man, simply shook his head and whispered, I can't answer that. Chloe, who had been watching this systematic demolition of her husband with a look of horrified disbelief, finally broke. She let out a strangled, hysterical sob and jumped to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is your fault, she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound that echoed through the stunned silence of the courtroom. You've always hated him. You've always been jealous of us, of our success. You're a monster, a vindictive, evil old woman. Judge Reed slammed her gavel, her voice thundering through the room. That is enough. Counsel, control your client. But Chloe was beyond control. Her meltdown was complete. Her carefully crafted image of the long-suffering daughter incinerated in a blaze of raw, entitled fury. Mr. Davies, his face pale with professional horror, simply said, Your Honor, the petitioner withdraws the petition. But it was too late for that. Judge Reed looked down from the bench, her gaze sweeping over my daughter and son-in-law with an expression of utter contempt. This hearing is concluded, she said, her voice cold as a tomb. The petition is dismissed with extreme prejudice, and I am referring the entirety of the evidence presented here today, including the testimony of Mr. Scott, to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation. She slammed her gavel one last time. It was over. I watched as 2 bailiffs approached the plaintiff's table. My daughter and her husband, who had walked into this courtroom as plaintiffs seeking to declare me incompetent, were now escorted out as potential felons. The final scene of my war took place not in a courtroom, but in the quiet, familiar sanctuary of my own study. Months have passed. The legal storm, which had raged with such fury, has finally subsided. Chloe and Gavin, faced with the mountain of evidence I had unearthed, accepted a plea bargain to avoid a protracted and humiliating public trial. They are now serving sentences in a federal prison for fraud and conspiracy. The whispers in the legal community about the return of the hammer have faded into a new, more respectful silence. My life has returned to a quiet, ordered rhythm, but it is a new kind of quiet, a new kind of order. My days are my own again. Free from the shadow of my daughter's treachery, my son David and his family visit often, their presence a warm, healing balm on the raw wounds of the past year. He helps me manage the complex task of dismantling the financial wreckage his sister and her husband left behind, helping the smaller investors they defrauded to recover some of their losses. Tonight, my study, my old war room, is being dismantled. The boxes of case files, the legal tomes, the secret reports from my investigators are being packed away into deep storage. My work is done. As I carefully wrap my old gavel in soft cloth and place it into a wooden box, my gaze falls upon a framed photograph on my desk. It is a picture of Chloe, taken on her 10th birthday. She is beaming, a gap-toothed smile of pure, uncomplicated joy, her arms wrapped around my neck. It is from a time before the resentment took root, before her husband's poison seeped into her soul, before my daughter was lost to me. I trace the outline of her happy, innocent face with my finger. I think of the one and only time I visited her in prison. She had requested the meeting. I had gone driven by some foolish, lingering maternal hope that she might express some remorse. She had shown none. She sat opposite me, behind the thick plexiglass, her eyes cold and hard. She did not apologize. She accused, she blamed me for her downfall, for ruining her life, for not being the weak, foolish mother she had needed me to be. It was in that moment that I finally accepted the truth. The daughter in the photograph was gone forever, and the woman who wore her face was a stranger to me. I look at this picture of the happy, innocent child she once was, and I feel no triumph in my victory. There is no satisfaction, no sense of righteous vindication. There is only a profound and weary sorrow, the deep, aching grief of a mother who, in order to save her own life and legacy, had to become the instrument of her own child's destruction. I close the lid on the box, the soft click echoing in the silent room. I have protected my kingdom. I have defended my honor. I have ensured that the life's work of my husband and me will not be squandered by fools and predators. But the cost was immeasurable. I have lost my own daughter. I switch off the light, leaving the study in darkness, a room of ghosts and memories. The hammer has done her final work. Now, at long last, Annabeth Harding can finally truly rest.